My name is Baldev Mutta and I'm the CEO of Punjabi Community Health Services. And on behalf of the Settlement Crisis Support Workers Conference 2018 team, we are honored and delighted to welcome all of you. We know it was a very short notice to some of you to attend this conference, but I will assure you that you will not be disappointed. We have excellent keynote speaker and several well-renowned speakers who will be sharing their expertise about working with newcomers who might be facing mental illness, signs, and symptoms. Over the 2 years, we will be addressing and providing practical tips for settlement crisis support workers to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health, sharing some of our partnership projects which are currently in works in Peel region, basic understanding about trauma-informed services, understanding and working to minimize risks, understanding LGBTQ issues for newcomers, taking care of self, which in our language we call it compassion fatigue. And together we will also discuss the challenges of working with newcomers who are facing mental illnesses and discussing some of the success stories of helping newcomers. Success of the conference depends ultimately on the many people who have worked within the planning and organizing this two-day event. Special thanks to the IRCC senior staff and program officers for believing in PCHS to organize this conference on a short notice and working with us round the clock to make it work. Special thanks to all the speakers, facilitators, scribes who agreed to move their commitments around to be here and share their expertise. Special thanks to the organizing committee for putting all this together on such a short notice. And special thanks to all of you for attending this conference. Our sincere appreciation to all of you for your dedication and support to learning so that together we can serve our clients better. We welcome you to this conference and look forward to your participation. I will now also like to invite Joy Kontram Sitanan, he is the program officer at IRCC, to say a few welcome remarks to all of you.
Thanks, Mr. Baldev. So my name is Joy Kontram Sitana. I'm a project officer with the Peel and Halton Settlement Network team. And today I'm here with my colleague, Bhavna Shah. She is the officer taking care of the RAP, so the Refugee Assistance Program of projects in Peel and Halton. So we are in the Etobicoke office, immigration office. That's where we are based, and we have like roughly 10 officers working on different settlement programs. And today I'm speaking on behalf of my team, Mr. Cliff Fast, my manager too, because he couldn't make it today. So we would like all to thank you for responding positively to that short notice invite. And that's a two-day conference that's been organized. As far as I remember, it was like last week, trying to put everything together. And I would say Amandip and her team did an amazing job, and I'm very impressed that the tables are not empty, they are all full. We have people around, we have everything well organized, and I would say a big round of applause to Mrs. Amandip and her team. So today and tomorrow, it's a two-day conference. So when we look at the program, we try to understand why we are here, what's the purpose, what's the goal, and I'm sure we have people from different parts of the community across Ontario. We all want to know how we work with different communities, different profile of newcomers around Ontario, and I'm sure with your expertise, your knowledge, your experiences, your best practices. You're going to share. It's going to be a common platform for everyone to just exchange and know each other. That's also a platform to network, to know your friends. And we at IRCC, we want to make it easy for everyone. We want to be consistent with the work, to know how we can monitor better, to understand how you just provide the outcomes to us and get the results. So it's more a constant approach and bringing everyone at the table today, this conference, and hope everyone can learn from each other and get some networking to do as well. So I'm not going to be long in that speech. I'm not too good at speech too. So thanks again. A big thank you to all the organizers today and tomorrow. And I wish you all the best. And we will continue funding similar events, and we hope everything works well. And we're going to get more funding for these events. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend and today's our keynote speaker, Dr. Sumita Veer Tyagi. Dr. Tyagi, what she has done in all her life, I can't summarize in 1 minute I am been given to introduce her, but I really want to highlight where she is coming from. I know, but I really want to let you know, Dr. Tyagi is a forensic and clinical psychologist with over 25 years of experience in working with newcomers, those in conflict with the law, survivors, as well as perpetrators of sexual and domestic violence. She has extensive experience in providing training, consultation, and mentorship on trauma-informed services, gender-based violence, mental health, and cross-cultural counseling. She is currently a staff psychologist in a large forensic psychiatric hospital in Ontario and has previously worked as a prison psychologist. She was an instructor for 10 years in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology, Ryerson University. She continues to take on leadership roles in developing clinical practices in areas such as cognitive behavior therapy for psychosis, gender-responsive programming for women with mental illness, and services to underserved and marginalized population. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Sumita Veer Tyagi.
Okay, I think this is the correct height. Thank you very much, Amandeep. And thank you very much to Punjabi Community Health Services for organizing this event. I'm delighted to be here this morning. It's a little intimidating to be so far away from the audience. And, you know, I'll get used to it in a minute or so. But before I continue, I want to acknowledge that here, where we are, in Ontario, in the GTA, in Peel region, this land has been the site of human activity for thousands of years. Before settlers came, before people like myself, immigrants that came to Canada, this land has been settled by Indigenous people, the Iroquois, the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, the Ojibwe, and also home to the Métis. People who have settled this and worked this land for thousands of years before people like myself came 25 years ago. Immigrants like myself, and perhaps some of you, have come to join the fabric of Canadian society to participate in building a nation, to contribute to building a country, to participate in the fabric of Canadian life as people have before us. And in that process, there are challenges. Would you agree? That the process of building a life, building a nation, many of us have come from countries where we understand the ideas behind nationhood, behind civil society. It is a process. And there are challenges, there are barriers, there are contributions, there are hopes that we bring and we also receive from the society in which we live. And I'm going to focus on a very small aspect of that journey into settlement, into a new country, into a new society. And the focus of my remarks are mental health. Before I go on with the presentation, I will put my glasses on. And also ask for help. Maybe it's just frozen. I want to declare that there's no conflicts of interest in terms of my role here. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. My remarks here are on the PowerPoint. Some of them I'm going to speak to in some depth, and some I will speak to directly. The PowerPoint will be sent to you via email. I think all your emails are with the organizers, so you'll have a copy of this. We're talking about the journey to Canada and the process of settlement and what that means for many people. It's a journey. People come to Canada with many hopes, with ambitions, with skills, with ideas, with contributions that they want to make. The process of settlement is not always linear, it's not always easy, and people also make sacrifices along the way. Sometimes these sacrifices, these challenges can take a real toll on the system. And we, as all of you in the mental health sector, see the impact of migration. When you look at, none of this is new information for you, but I'll go over it very, very quickly. Canada is, amongst the G8 countries, one of the most diverse countries in the world in terms of our composition. And our diversity encompasses languages, cultures, color, all manner of people. At this point, according to Statistics Canada, published in the Daily in 2016, October, more than 1 in 5 Canadians, so just over 20% Canadians are foreign-born. Most people, most immigrants have come under the economic migrant category. Quite a few, about 27% came in the family class, and this was a little bit of a surprise for me. I thought the number was lower. Almost 12% came to Canada as refugees. And in recent years, Asia, more than Northern Europe and more than Southern Europe, Asia is now the primary source continent for recent immigrants. In 2016, the majority of newcomers, so 60% and above, 62% of newcomers to Canada were born in Asia. And for the first time, Africa comes ahead of Europe as a source continent of recent immigrants, with its share of about 13%. And to no one's surprise, a number of immigrants come to Ontario. Ontario's share of immigrants is quite significant, almost 40%. Again, no surprise, a number of immigrants come to major cities. Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal get more than 50% of immigrants that come to Canada. Although in recent times, more people are settling in the prairies as well. We can look around us, whether it's the GTA or Peel region or, communities that you live and work in, that there are a number of people who are from racialized communities. So the term racialized is a term that's replaced older terms like racial minority or visible minority or people of color. It's a recognition that race is a social construct. It's not a biological construct, so it's a different lens in looking at people. that almost 20% of the Canadian population belongs to people who are racialized, and this becomes a significant factor in both mental health, in terms of services, in terms of responding in culturally appropriate ways downstream. We see the effects of this factor. South Asians are, excuse me, one of the largest ethnic minorities in Toronto, and certainly in Peel region. The statistics showed that they are 1/3 and probably higher than 1/3 of the population in cities like Brampton, where we are today. None of this is of any surprise to you. You work with newcomers, you work in settlement, you work with people of diversity, and you know that the face of Canada is changing. The face of newcomers to Canada is changing, and their needs and challenges are alive and well when they walk into your office. We live and work in this environment. To us, sometimes you have to step back from your environment to really be able to take stock, to step out of your immediate environment, to be able to have a little bit of distance and perspective from what's going on in front of you. This is an old saying, I think it's Turkish, I'm not 100% sure, that to the fish, the water is invisible. Meaning that when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to see context, it's hard to see your environment, it's hard to analyze or deconstruct forces that are impinging on you because you're just in it so much. And so when you come to trainings or you come to roundtables or discussion groups like this is where you can step back and take a little bit of a perspective on all of the things that impact on people's mental health, for example. We know that coming into a new country, coming into a new culture, there are stages that people go through. It varies with different people. It's not a linear path. For some it's easier, for some it's not. But when you come, certainly I remember when I came 25 years ago, you know, there's happiness and excitement and anticipation and looking forward to it and thinking, you know, I'm coming from a hot country. I immigrated from India and I was excited about coming to a super cold country. And I thought it's cold all the time. Little did I know that in July and August it gets as hot as it is in Bombay, and I thought, I left a hot country to come to this. So, you know, just figuring things out and that sense of happiness and anticipation, I'm making a new life. And as those emotions wear off, you know, you discover that it's not going to be a linear path. There are going to be challenges, there's confusion, you know, there's irritability, and you think, why am I not getting ahead? You know, I've come here, I've come with skills, and I've come with energy, and I've come with, you know, excitement. There are so many barriers. How can this be? But there's also energy, yes? People come full of fervor and energy in terms of, all right, I know there's going to be problems, but I'm ready. Come on, bring it on. And sometimes that resilience can triumph, and sometimes that resilience takes a beating. It's a slow, gradual process of adjustment and, you know, sort of finding your balance. Okay, things are going to take a while to get on. I'm going to have to settle for, you know, jobs that I know I'm overqualified for. We're going to have to live in this neighborhood, but, you know, eventually in 5 years we'll be able to buy a house, maybe move here. So you adjust your expectations. You adjust your normal, if you will, based on what's happening around you, and eventually reach a place of adjustment. This is by no means linear, and by no means does everybody go through it in the exact same way. Sometimes the effect of this process lasts for many, many years, as we know. There's a number of things that can affect how people adjust to a new climate. a new social climate, a new physical climate, a new environment. What do you think some of those things are that contribute to successful adjustment in your experience? Social support is a big one, absolutely. English classes and access to language development. An excellent observation. Pre-migration support, information, knowledge. Having a financial cushion. For some people there is a good cushion, sometimes there isn't. Basic needs such as housing, absolutely. Anything else that you've seen affects people's adjustment? Absolutely. Are willing to make many sacrifices, if the children are happy. Yes, table 7. How well they're received? By whom? So there's social factors, basic needs, pre-migration factors, yes. So what is the pathway that they want, whether it's professional or economic success? Absolutely. You know this to be true. Perhaps you've lived it yourself. I certainly have. It's a combination of individual factors, resilience, capacity for focus, energy, all kinds of, internal psychological things, external factors, environmental factors, access to resources, professional development, and so on. So it's a combination of any number of things. Yes? Yes, absolutely. So all of these things come into play, yeah? You've absolutely nailed it. There are any number of things that will impact on the post-migration experience. All of the things that you described, we're going to get to in a minute. But do you think immigration entry status, at the time of entry, what a person's status is, do you think that would affect a person's adjustment and mental health and their post-migration experience? Absolutely. And in fact, migrant status is a risk factor in psychosis. I'll come to that in a bit. Post-migration experience in terms of how well people adjust, what they're bringing to the table, their attitudes, opportunities they get, and so on. One of the things that I wanted to reference was that, we talk about immigrants and refugees, but forced migration, the experience of refugees who come to Canada, people are coming under significant life-altering circumstances, which is different from voluntary migration. I came as a skilled worker 25 years ago, and that experience is very different from somebody who's had to leave their country with nothing except a suitcase full of clothes that they grabbed when they had to leave. It is life-altering. A woman, her name is Warsan Sher, she's a Somali-British poet, has written this beautiful poem called Home. It's a very long poem. If you Google her, you'll find it. And in one of the stanzas, she says, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well." At home, we talk to our children about, the war that is going on in this country, the civil conflict going on in that country, the genocide in this country. And our children in our home growing up here have no idea. And they will ask questions like, but how does this girl go to school in Syria? I mean, all the buildings have crashed. There's nothing to go. And I think, yeah, this is the experience. This is what people live with every day. And people who are leaving these conditions and coming to Canada are coming under life-altering circumstances, witnessing war, witnessing all manner of atrocities, relatives getting killed, children who go missing, bombing every day. And you think, how can this be normal? If there's a fire next door in this house, or if there's some kind of emergency 2 doors down, the whole street is thrown off. I think if you have bombs landing to the left of you and right of you, how can this be normal? But it becomes normal for people until they're in a safe place. Threats, people who've been persecuted for their political ideology, for writing an article in a newspaper, for example, or just scarcity, not enough food. It's not that, we don't have money or, we can't earn a living, but there isn't enough food. There's a scarcity of everything. And living in a climate of fear. This is life-altering. This goes beyond our understanding of trauma. It goes very deep. And the experience for many refugees doesn't end. They're not on a plane and landing in Canada. A lot of people have lived in refugee camps before they got here. A lot of people have come here and lived in detention for a long time. It takes a huge toll on individuals, their mental health, their coping resources, their economic resources, their ability to survive, basically. And some of the things that you talked about here, people who are not refugees, there's lots of factors that affect their adjustment, the age at which they came, gender. How do you think gender affects adjustment? What have you seen in your experience where you say, yes, gender is a role in post-migration adjustment? Okay? So people's gender roles change, gender-related activities change also. How do you think age affects post-migration adjustment? What about loss of status? How might that affect people's adjustment to Canada? 12.
I had one woman last week say, back home I was important. I worked in a hospital, I had a clinic, I taught at the university. She said, here, I'm nothing, and started to cry. So it's huge. They're used to living a certain way, and the other comment they made was, back home when you have 20 pairs of shoes, you never worry about having shoes. That here, you can't even afford to go buy the shoes.
How do you think ethnic identity or one's identity as belonging to a certain group affects post-migration adjustment? We all have a need to belong, yeah? We all search for belonging in different ways. And sometimes identity in terms of either religious affiliation or cultural affiliation can become really important to a person in terms of their transition to a new country before they can become full participants in their new culture, so to speak. Food insecurity. Do you think immigrants and refugees face food insecurity? Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is not rocket science, yeah? How can people focus on internal psychological wellness or coping when you're struggling for food and to put food on the table? There is a hierarchy of needs, so figuring out what it is that people need is a big part of what we do, whether it's in settlement or in mental health or in a hospital or in an outpatient setting. I'm going to skip this one. This slide, is reiterating things that we know already, that when newcomers are here, their sense of belonging to their own group, in-group, if you will, how they're received, their participation in receiving society, all of this impacts on their adjustment. And some people are able to overcome adversity successfully, sometimes at great cost to themselves, and sometimes people are not able to overcome adversity successfully and need help, which is where, we see them. The negative impact of adjustment, you see it everywhere. You talked about gender roles. I remember a South Asian man who's in his 50s who was charged with domestic violence for the second time, and he said to me, "But Dr. Smita, you don't understand. They come here, these women, right away. they get ideas. Canada fills their head with ideas. She was fine, and now, as soon as we came to Canada, she wants this, she wants that. I said, so you think, as soon as she landed, yes, literally, we got off from the plane at Pearson Airport, boom. She was like, so, I mean, it's funny, but not in a sort of funny ha-ha kind of way. But there's a significant impact on gender roles. We see so much of marital conflict because people are under a lot of pressure, just day-to-day grind of running the household. There's a lot on the woman, there's a lot on the man of the house. Sometimes she has a better job, is pulling in more money, sometimes he's employed or he's not. This creates a lot of stress and a lot of friction in homes that comes out then in many different ways. You see, when you see mental health breakdowns in families, very often it doesn't come out until things are quite bad. It impacts on social networks. People don't want to talk about what's happening in the home to their friends or family. You know, word spreads at the temple or, you know, in the community. People won't talk about it because there's a lot to lose. Financially, people often run out of the cushion of money that they have and then are looking to their friends and family for support or, you know, working in dead-end jobs to help them. There's many, many negative impacts, and we see this in mental health, in the field of mental health. One of the findings of a study that was published in 2016, there were a number of findings. It was quite a large study. I've just put up a few things on these two slides. That immigrants basically come to Canada in better mental and physical health, but within a 7-year period, the healthy immigrant effect is lost. And typically in racialized groups, you see the highest level of deterioration, both in physical and in mental health. And the next point on the slide, asylum seekers, this is no surprise to you. Asylum seekers who are in detention have very, very high rates of PTSD and depression and anxiety compared to those who've never been in detention. I was recently called to consult on a case where a man is being held in a maximum detention facility in Ontario who has not spoken. He's electively mute. He has not spoken for 4 years. And there's no documentation, you know, he's stuck in a system. It's a complicated story, but there's no way to get him a full psychiatric evaluation. The correctional system doesn't know what to do with him. It is a big problem. The same study, and you have it in your slides when you get it, that migrants, international migrants, have a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of psychosis. So we're talking about schizophrenia, psychotic disorders, not, you know, regular depression and anxiety kinds of things. 2 to 3-fold increased risk of psychosis compared to the host population, and this risk persists sometimes into the 2nd and 3rd generation. Refugees, again, no surprise. Higher rates of psychotic disorder and migrant status has been repeatedly shown in study after study after study as being a risk factor for mental health breakdown. Another interesting finding, amongst all the groups that were studied in the study, and this study had looked at 14 to 40-year-olds over a 10-year period. It was a very, very large sample, it was more than 4 million cases over a 10-year period. Amongst all the groups, highest rates of schizophrenia amongst racialized groups, Caribbean, Bermuda, East Africa, and South Asia. This is consistent with international literature, and it's consistent certainly with what I see in my practice, in both hospital setting and in private practice. Interestingly, perceived discrimination by racialized populations has been seen to be associated with more severe symptoms in schizophrenia, both positive and negative symptoms. For many people, adversity in childhood, victimization, sexual abuse, physical abuse, adverse events in childhood or adulthood are associated with a higher risk of schizophrenia. One thing is very clear, that migration and post-migration experiences absolutely play a role in the development of psychotic disorders, in mental illness and also recovery. I'll draw your attention to a couple of things. The second point, immigrants are less likely to use mental health services compared to long-term residents and the host populations. If you look at the last bullet point, this particular study, which is also quite recent, showed that in Ontario, where they did this study in 3 cities, in a sample of first episode patients, so these are people where there's a psychotic episode, it's the first time, they had not been treated for 66 months. What does that tell you? They're either not coming for help, it's not been identified, or it's been identified and there has not been treatment for whatever reason. Either the client has not accepted treatment or services are not available, whatever the reason. But this is quite a significant finding, which means that there are a lot of families living with people who have a serious mental illness, and it takes a huge toll, as we know, both on individuals and their families. So when we talk about mental illness, we talk about mental disorders, we're talking about a range of things. I'm not going to go through all of these. We're talking about serious psychosis, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, mood disorder, even depression. Depression can present in many different ways. You can have people with serious depression with psychotic features, and you can have depression which is your regular depression with anxiety. One of the things I've noticed, partly it's because of our training, partly because we don't necessarily look for these things, is that in neurodevelopmental disorders, the first one, autism spectrum, is underdiagnosed in racialized populations. In South Asian populations, I know that for sure, but also I've seen this in many young black youth, that autism presents very differently, and sometimes it's not picked up for a very long time. So I think the idea is, looking at mental disorders, there's many different types, they present in many different ways, and they need to be assessed properly so that people can get the support they need. For example, in our system, people who have a developmental delay, intellectual challenges, and they have a mental illness can actually qualify for services with the DSO sector, the developmental services sector. It's a separate pot of funding, it's a separate model of funding, and it's exclusively geared for people with dual diagnosis. But unless people are identified, they're screened, they're not going to be able to access the service they need, yeah? So they're going to be knocking on different doors without success. Some of the things that we see, and I'm sure you see this in your practice and in your agencies, self-harm, suicide attempts, families reporting that there's alcohol abuse, drug abuse, marital conflict. Do you get people who come to you wanting help? Yes. Breakdown in terms of parenting. Some of the more recent things that have come to our attention are pornography, excessive pornography use, child pornography. People are getting involved in the criminal justice system in many different ways. So they are presenting with any number of things that need to be appropriately screened. When we talk about serious mental illness like schizophrenia, there's also a lot of lack of awareness and lack of education around what that means, and also a lot of fear around schizophrenia, that schizophrenic people can get violent. The truth is that people with schizophrenia are at very low risk of getting violent. It's a very small percentage that get violent. But here's the caveat. If you have schizophrenia and substance use that go together, the risk is very high. Are you following me? That the mental illness in and of itself is not a risk factor for violence, but as soon as you add substance abuse, the risk goes up. And 40% of homicides don't occur very often. It's a very low base rate for violence, but 40% of homicides which are committed by people with psychosis, they commit the homicide before they've been treated properly. And these are the people that we end up seeing in our system, the forensic mental health system. So they've been formed, they've been placed in hospital on involuntary status, and then the criminal system gets involved, and then this very long process begins. In the Ontario Review Board, so this is the board that oversees people who have mental illness and who are involved in the criminal system. They have also been seeing many more racialized groups come through the system and have been asking for more culturally competent services. So we can provide culturally competent services, get training in trauma and all of these things. But I would like to remind people that we work within a model that can be very fractured. So you see mental health as, a psychological problem. You see physical illness over here. But really, taking a broader social determinants of health approach to understanding health and well-being, that whether it's mental health or physical health, all of these things, support networks, income security, food security, cultural adjustment, experiences of safety, whether it's neighborhood level or safety in the home, taking a social determinants of health model is where we need to be. If we are going to provide services that are actually effective and help people in recovery. And surprise, surprise, it's hard to do. It's not easy because there are many barriers to people getting help. Some are internal barriers, some are external barriers. People's awareness of mental illness. Do you see that in your practice? Absolutely. There's a lot of silence around mental illness. Some of it is just lack of understanding, not knowing what is going on. The other day I was talking to somebody who, a South Asian man from the Punjabi community. We were talking about somebody who's ended up in hospital, and I was talking about the schizophrenia, and he said to me, "What is this? You use some term right now." I said, "Schizophrenia." He said, "Ye kya cheez hai? What is this?" So there is absolutely a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding, and a lot of silence around mental illness in families. Sometimes people make efforts, to understand it, and are often, bullet point number 5, use spiritual or religious explanatory frameworks that, somebody has done some jadoo tona on my son. He's perfectly fine. We just need to get, some prayers and go to the priest and do this and, cast off the evil eye. I recently assessed a young man who had a psychotic episode 3 years ago. And for 2 years, the family is an Indian family, of Hindu family, who has taken him to various spiritual healers in Toronto, in Canada, and then in the UK, and then in India. So this 21-year-old boy, and we know that schizophrenia early onset happens in early 20s, for 2 years was untreated, and his paranoia was getting worse and worse, and the family has spent $25,000 dishing it out to various spiritual healers to cast the evil eye off, until he committed a very, very serious crime and ended up in the system, which is where he was first assessed and is now being treated. There's also, if you look at number 10 and 11, these are problems that you come across every day. There's a lack of family doctors. If the family doctors is the first stop, then it becomes very difficult to get specialized services. There's very long lists for psychiatrists. There's also, inpatient beds. Hospitals are discharging people before they can be treated properly or treated optimally. And if they're treated optimally, they need to take their medications. Will they be able to afford their medications, and so on? So there are a number of barriers to seeking help that, we have all seen in our practice that are absolutely areas of advocacy, no question. So there's been a lot of work done on immigrant and refugee mental health. Reports, task forces, white papers, academic institutions, independent research, government papers. This report came out in 1988, 4 or 5 years before I arrived in Canada. It was a very important document, the result of a task force. Dr. Morton Beiser at the time, very well-known Canadian who did a lot of work in this area. They made a number of recommendations. 1988, it is 2018, and we are saying pretty much exactly the same. If you read that report from 88, it feels like you're reading a report that's being written a couple of years ago, that there are a number of risk factors that affect mental health. We need services to be accessible, that many people need to be involved in mental health, mental illness, in recovery, not just the psychologist or the psychiatrist in their office or the hospital, all of us. Settlement workers, crisis support, inpatient, outpatient, private practice, we need to be working more collaboratively, and that no one level of government can be responsible for this. It's too big a task. It has to be multi-pronged. So what can we do at an individual level? Attend trainings like you're doing today. Essentially, listening to clients. Shockingly, there's a lot to be learned when we listen actively. Respecting people's migration experience. Whenever I meet somebody who's a newcomer or who's an immigrant or refugee to Canada, that's where I start talking about the journey and what that's meant. And sometimes all it takes is asking a couple of questions and the door opens to many, many things, a window to the person's soul and what they've been carrying for so many years. So some of it is understanding trauma-informed care, and some of it is just compassion and common humanity. You don't have to be a highly trained rocket scientist in mental health to understand that there's no replacement for kindness and compassion to our clients, yeah? Also, number 6, there's a hierarchy of needs. If there's not enough food on the table and if I'm struggling to pay rent, it's going to be really hard for me to focus on, developing coping skills and all of this other stuff that I need to do. There's some basic needs, housing, food, employment. So looking at what is most salient for this person. That yes, the marriage is in the digger, they're having problems with their children, one step at a time. Let's focus on what the needs are that need to be met now. Also, I think in terms of, supporting people, especially where there's mental illness, is providing assurance and support that, if you ask for help, if you go to the hospital or outpatient department or mental health agency, it's not going to affect your status in Canada. Immigration is not going to be looking at the records. Somebody came to Punjabi Health Agency and they'd say, show us your file. It's not like that. That this information is not shared, that it's not going to affect, where you end up working. It's not going to affect whether or not you get status in Canada. And really supporting, point number 8 and 9, supporting clients in building confidence that, some of these things are easily treated, and asking for help is a good thing. I think, too, there's lots of now evidence-based research on what works in psychosis, in treating depression and anxiety, and we need to use those interventions. So getting more training, getting on board with learning what kind of evidence-based interventions work. So you're effective in your counseling. So if you're using counseling strategies that are not that effective, if you replace them with evidence-based interventions, then you get a bigger bang for your buck, yeah? People get better. So there are models out there, and getting that training is, I think, really important. Assessing number 12, goodness of fit between the client and service offered. Now, not everybody is psychologically minded and can sit through, cognitive behavioral therapy and this therapy and that therapy. Sometimes people just need to get on with their life the way they want. There's a 62-year-old man who's in the hospital right now. He comes from he's not educated. He comes from a small village in Punjab. He had a psychotic episode which wasn't treated. He doesn't speak English very well. Now you tell him that you must sit now in 17 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. So he says to me directly, "What is wrong with you? You make me go to all these things. I have to, what am I going to tell the social worker?" It's like, what I need to go home. You tell them I need to go home. Instead, they send me here and I have to sit and I have to talk. What is there to talk about? This is the problem. My son is not doing this and my daughter-in-law did this and they made me sign the paper for the house. This is the problem. So, do you think it would be helpful for me to force this man to go to CBT for 17 sessions? No, it's not going to work. There isn't a goodness of fit between what the client is presenting, between what their needs are, and what I have to bring to the table. And lots of people come from countries where, helping is not a profession. I know in small towns in India, certainly where I grew up, or where I was born, social workers are seen as a big problem because they come and break up your house. They'll talk to the ladies about, health and, childbearing, and then next thing you know, these ladies want to go to work, and then they're fighting with their husbands and saying you can't drink. Social workers, big problem. Don't talk to social work. It's not seen as a profession where you go to people to ask for help. I've had people say to my face, rightly so, "I must come to you for help, yes, for counseling therapy. I will come, I will tell you my problems, and then I must pay you. What is this?" I said, yes, this is a very good point. Hard to get your head around it. So the point is the goodness of the goodness of fit between what the client is presenting, what their needs are, and what we have to offer. And I think practicing ethically. Mental health, mental illness, and breakdowns are serious things. So you don't have to feel like you have to do it all. We work as a team. As a crisis worker, if you're seeing a psychotic breakdown, you can't be expected to carry that. And that's not good practice. But being able to make proper referrals, point number 14, to mental health agencies, to other services, and educating the client. It's a long road. There are people who have a diagnosis, have not sought treatment for 2-3 years until something really bad happens. So it's a long road. It's not like you can have 1 or 2 conversations and the family's on board. Okay, great. We're going to go, get medication for this, or we're going to take the family member to an inpatient unit. So just anticipate that it's a long road. Advocating for clients and, as Baldev said, practicing self-care. There are other things we can do at an agency level, providing training in mental health, training in immigrant and refugee mental health. There are a number of people who are trying different models of care. So a lot of primary care, at least in Ontario, is very physician-oriented. But there are a number of people that are using different models where there's a housing support worker on staff, there's a psychologist on staff, there are crisis support people, so working as teams. The other thing that's happening more in physical medicine is telemedicine. Where people can't access a family doctor or a specialist, using telemedicine. And telepsychiatry is used quite a lot, especially in northern communities. in indigenous communities, because a lot of the psychiatrists that we have can't, go out to remote areas. So that's another possibility. But really looking at collaborating and ways in which we can all be part of mental health recovery. So we're not doing this alone. And at a macro level, there's many things going on, in terms of policy, research, the Mental Health Commission. I've given you some examples of programs in Toronto that are providing support for mental health and mental illness amongst immigrants and refugees, and working with local community groups. But we don't have to do this alone. And seeking support, working collaboratively, having a multidisciplinary approach, and getting more training. I think all of these are going to be really important, and it's a long-term thing. It's not going away anytime soon. So we're in this together, and likely we'll have more conversations about how to do this effectively. And with that, I thank you for your time and for giving me space to express my thoughts. Oh, yes.
If there are any questions, please.
Any questions?
One of the biggest barriers that a lot of us probably face when providing services to our clients or referring them to services is accessibility for clients. And I'm not just referring to wait lists and language barriers and everything, even location. And that's, to me, that's one of the biggest challenges and you touched upon that, is that clients can't always come to us or go to the referral service, the service that we've referred them to. And it's especially problematic when the services available to certain language groups or certain age groups are very limited and they have long wait lists, so they don't really have a choice but to go there. That becomes problematic and they don't get there, so they can't access those services. So what are your thoughts on this and how this can be avoided?
I have many thoughts on many different things. This is a very real problem, yeah? And people are trying different things in different regions. In Peel region, for example, there's a service called Coast, where a mobile crisis worker will come with the police, if it's getting called to a house. Let's say it's a Tamil-speaking client and they know that already, they might call Coast to come and help them in that interaction. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't know until the police have come to the door that this client doesn't speak English, but sometimes they know, so they call the Coast worker, and so on and so forth. So the problems are real, but I think regions are trying different models to the best of their ability. In Toronto, they have a similar model as well, where they have a social worker that can go with certain with certain police teams, especially if they know that this call is related to mental health. So, the caller says that, my son's going crazy and, he's, threatening and he's, breaking things and so on. They're like, okay, this is a mental health related situation. They call the mental health or crisis worker, and if they know about the language, they'll call the person. There are other teams where, family health teams in Toronto will call on language-speaking psychiatric social workers or psychologists. People are trying different things. That's all I can say. And I think part of it is, working collaboratively with cross-cultural agencies who have expertise, so we can share that expertise. I think advocating with local services to add language ability, to add workers to those services. And I think, one group in Toronto has done that, is developing a listserv of professionals in the area who speak those languages. It's one of the LIN affiliated, I'm sorry, it's not coming to me, but they're developing a portal that'll have a list of psychologists, psychiatric social workers, and so on, and their languages, so people know that they can call on someone. There's also a group of psychologists and psychiatrists in Toronto, to which I belong, where if a psychiatric assessment is needed, they can call this person or this person for a refugee in detention, for a refugee person in detention, or somebody who is awaiting disposition. So, yes. I think trying different things and now also advocating for those services, yes.
Do you mind if you provide us with those resources that you're thinking about? Like maybe added a slide or something like where you can give us like specific resources, because I think that's what will help on the front line level, that we will need those kind of resources.
Yes. The LIN group, the LIN affiliated group I referred to has developed a website. I don't know if they've gone live yet, but it's a website that will help newcomers find medical services and affiliated services that match their needs. It's Toronto-wide. So there's a few different things happening, but yes, a couple of the links are in my slides, and that one I will send it to you.